This is a fan fiction based on The Green Ember, A Worthy Opponent, Part 2 out of 2, by Love Green Ember. You have 3 seconds, Lord Captain, before he will begin, the Wolf General called. I would advise you not to anger him. Of course, you could always back out now. The wolves howled their sickening laughter. Pickett, son, it's me, Helmer. What are you? The rabbit that was Pickett regarded Helmer with cold distaste. Helmer? I see nothing sailor-like about you, and nothing challenging either. Prepare to taste death, Helmer. The golden brown of Pickett's eyes glowed with mirth at his own words. 1, 2... Pickett, please, I don't want to. Begin! With a wolf-like howl, Pickett leapt forward, sword raised. Helmer raised his sword and deflected the blow, resisting his instinctual urge to find flesh with the blade. Pickett stumbled back, looking dazed and confused. The wolves howled in disappointment. You are a foolish fighter, old man. You could have... Pickett lowered his sword, his eyes growing dim. Helmer kept his sword poised. Pickett, they're messing with your mind. I didn't do this to you. I would never train you to do this. Helmer saw Pickett's hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. He knew he was running out of time. Who did this to you? Pickett's face looked sickly and pale, his eyes fractured. Helmer suddenly knew the answer to his question. Temeth Seer. I saw Temeth Seer and... Attack him, you idiot! The wolf general snarled. Pickett unfroze. He charged Helmer, his face contorting with unnatural rage. Helmer stepped aside and Pickett tumbled forward into the dust. Helmer watched Pickett pant on the ground, a trickle of blood running from his mouth. It felt as though a sword had been driven home in his heart. His student, his most trusted apprentice, was helpless. Helpless. And Pickett didn't care. Helmer knew Pickett's deepest desires. Pickett loved the cause. He loved his mates and his fellow soldiers, and he loved his family. It was to his brother Jax that Pickett had first sworn his undying loyalty and protection. It was for Jax that he'd sworn never to be helpless. How was it possible that any of Temeth's mind games had stamped those desires out? Pickett, look at me! Pickett turned, looking up at Helmer with an expression of fractured pride and fear. Helmer could imagine him as a young buck, a child, confused and angry that he'd fallen again. Ladybug, you gotta snap out of this. The only way we're getting out of here alive, we, as in you and me and Heather, is if you back down. Get rid of your pride, son, Helmer pleaded, leaning over and retrieving Pickett's fallen sword. Pickett sniffed, digging at his eyes. He didn't appear to see Helmer, or Heather, or anybody. Powers, he mumbled, his words slurring. They've powers. I can't resist. His eyes bolted wide as if he'd been burned. Fight him, fool, fight him, he murmured in an entirely different, crazed voice. Stop resisting. You've got to... No! Pickett shook his head, his hands shaking. Helmer watched in horror as Pickett raised a fist, then lowered it, then raised it again as if fighting himself. I won't! Helmer glanced around. Every wolf's eye was upon them. The howling and jeering had all but died down. The valley was silent, but for the wind that whistled through the pine trees. The sun was fading fast, and Helmer prayed to the leapers that would stay as long as possible. He hated fighting in the dark, when it was impossible to discern enemies from allies. Let me go! Pickett screamed, pulling on his ears as he knelt in the dust at Helmer's feet. I can't. This is no fun anymore, the wolf general snarled into the silence. You swore on your honor, rabbit scum. Now kill him, or the girl dies alongside you. The wolves stalked forward, eyes wild with hungry light. No, wait! A clear, familiar voice rang on the wind. Helmer straightened, tearing his eyes from Pickett, and looked around. He knew that voice. He was sure he knew it. There was a buzz of confusion among the wolves as a rabbit doe pushed through them, elbowing them in the jaws and stamping on their paws as she made her way toward the two. "Oh dear," Wheezy said, rushing to Picket's side. "Good leapers, Picket, you're useless." Picket still struggled on the ground, as though trying to break free from invisible bonds. "Must escape powers," Wheezy sighed. "Uncle Helmer, you wouldn't happen to have a book? Oh, never mind, I'll do it myself." Helmer watched in dazed silence as his niece, with difficulty, Wheezy sighed. "Uncle Helmer, you wouldn't happen to have a book? Oh, never mind, I'll do it myself." Helmer watched in dazed silence as his niece, with difficulty, lifted Picket to his feet. "There you go, Packslayer." She regarded him in thoughtful silence for a moment, then shook her head. "Wow, you are dense," she said, patting him on the back. Picket looked just as confused as Helmer. "Wheezy? Wheezy? Where?" He trailed off, still deathly pale. Wheezy raised her hand and smacked Picket upside the head, to a collective gasp from all spectators. Picket frowned, raising a hand to his cheek. Then he shook his head, as though shaking free of whatever chains had restricted him. To his eyes returned the usual golden-brown fire. "Wheezy? Master?" He looked around, evidently flustered at the army of wolves. "Heather!" He rushed to her side. "What happened?" Helmer looked around at the wolves and raptors. "Now might not be the time for comparing stories, Ladybug," he said, picking up his sword. Wheezy smiled, drawing an arrow from her quiver. "Though trust me, this was a terrible, awfully good one." The battle began.